In the center of a high-altitude clearing in the San Juan National Forest, 3 miles from the nearest trail, searchers found 2 sets of footprints that simply stopped in the middle of a snow-dusted meadow. There were no return tracks. There were no signs of a struggle. But on October 14, 2024, when the infrared cameras finally picked up a heat signature, the rescuers didn't find a campsite. They found Elias and Sarah Thorne. They were tied together with industrial-grade zip ties, back to back, shivering in the -4-degree air, staring at a tree line they refused to name. They were alive. Barely. But here is the detail the Hinsdale County Sheriff's Office tried to strike from the official report. Elias Thorne was wearing a watch that wasn't his, and the time on it was set 3 hours into the future. Why were 2 experienced hikers found bound in a location it would have been physically impossible for them to reach on foot in the time they'd been missing? To understand the impossibility of October 14th, you have to look at October 11th. Elias Thorne was an aerospace engineer. Sarah was a trauma nurse. These weren't amateurs chasing a sunset for an Instagram post. They traveled in a custom-built 2022 Mercedes Sprinter van, equipped with satellite GPS, a redundant power system, and enough cold weather gear to survive a month in the tundra. They were methodical. They were prepared. They were the people you want with you when things go wrong. At 9:15 a.m., they pulled into the North Vista trailhead. The dashcam footage, recovered later, shows a perfectly normal morning. Elias is checking the tire pressure. Sarah is locking the side door. They look like a couple with everything under control. They told the park ranger they'd be back by 5 p.m. for a dinner reservation in Lake City. They never showed up. And this is where it stops making sense. The Sprinter van remained in the lot. When investigators broke the window 48 hours later, they found Sarah's phone on the dashboard. It was plugged into the charger. On the screen was a draft of a text message to her sister. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a photo of a man standing by a silver SUV 3 rows behind them in the parking lot. The man wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at their van's rear tires. But when the FBI ran the plates on that SUV from the photo, they discovered the vehicle had been crushed in a salvage yard in Ohio 3 years prior. The plates didn't exist. The man in the photo didn't have a face that facial recognition software could map. It was blurred, not by motion, but by what technicians call a digital smear. You're standing at that trailhead now. The air is thin. You have your gear, your maps, and your confidence. You see a man by your car. You think nothing of it. You head into the trees. By 1 p.m. on October 11th, Elias and Sarah reached the 10,000-foot marker. We know this because Elias's Garmin watch synced with a satellite pinger. He was at 38.04 degrees north. His heart rate was a steady 85 beats per minute. He was calm. He was hiking. But at 1:12 p.m., his heart rate spiked to 164. It stayed there for exactly 12 minutes. During those 12 minutes, his GPS coordinates didn't move an inch. He wasn't running. He wasn't climbing. He was standing perfectly still while his heart tried to beat out of his chest. The search team leader later admitted that the area where the Garmin stopped moving was a sheer cliff face. There is no ledge. There is no standing ground. To be at those exact coordinates, Elias Thorne would have had to be suspended in midair 200 feet above the canyon floor. At 1:24 p.m., the Garmin went dark. Not because the battery died. The casing was found later, crushed, as if it had been placed under a hydraulic press. But it wasn't found at the cliff. It was found inside the locked glove compartment of their van back at the trailhead 3 miles away. The search began on October 12th. 64 personnel, 4 canine units, and 2 helicopters. They focused on the North Vista Loop. It's a closed system, one way in, one way out. If you're on that trail, you're seen. On that Friday, there were 42 other hikers on that specific 4-mile stretch. Not one of them reported seeing a couple matching the Thornes' description. It's as if they stepped off the trailhead and into a vacuum. But here's what the police didn't release until 2019 about similar disappearances in this corridor. Every single person who vanishes here is found with their shoes removed and placed neatly side by side, exactly 22 feet from where they were last seen. When the first canine, a bloodhound named Blue, picked up Sarah's scent near the trailhead, he didn't head toward the mountains. He ran directly to the silver SUV's previous parking spot. He began to howl, a sound his handler described as vocalized terror, and then he collapsed. The vet report cited sudden, acute neurological failure. Blue was 3 years old and in peak health. He died on the asphalt of the parking lot while staring at the empty space where a dead car had sat. By 6 p.m. on the second day, the system began to fail the Thornes. The Hinsdale sheriff called off the aerial search due to unfavorable winds, despite the local weather station reporting a dead calm. The investigator proxy in this case, Elias's brother Marcus, arrived on the scene at 10 p.m. Marcus is a retired civil engineer. He doesn't believe in ghosts. He believes in math. He began to track the cell tower pings from the area, looking for ghost signals, data packets that the towers receive but can't attribute to a specific device. He found one. At 3:11 a.m. on October 13th, a signal pulsed from the deep interior of the forest, a place with zero cellular coverage. The signal was Sarah's phone ID. But Sarah's phone was sitting in an evidence bag in the sheriff's office. Marcus didn't wait for the deputies. He took his own thermal gear and headed toward that pulse. He found a trail of orange surveyor's tape that wasn't there during the official search. It led deep into the dead zone, a section of the forest where the trees grow in concentric circles, a phenomenon biologists call geotropic stress. In the center of that circle, Marcus found Sarah's hiking jacket. It was folded neatly on a stump. Inside the pocket was a handwritten note on a piece of hospital stationery Sarah would have had in her kit. It said, "He is measuring the time. Don't look at the sky." This is the point where the investigation stops being about a missing couple and starts being about a cover-up. The sheriff's office claimed Marcus planted the jacket. They threatened him with obstruction. Ask yourself why a local law enforcement agency would actively discourage a family member from finding a clue in a life-or-death disappearance. Or better yet, ask why the USGS map for that specific coordinate has been under revision for the last decade. The drone footage from the third morning shows something the searchers missed. At the 4-minute mark of the raw file, there is a flash of light in the tree line near the dead zone. If you zoom in, if you really look at the pixels, you can see a figure. It's not Elias. It's not Sarah. It's a person in a high-visibility vest, identical to the ones worn by the search team. But that person is standing in a patch of thorns that would shred human skin. They are standing there, motionless, watching the rescue helicopters fly overhead. When the drone pans back 30 seconds later, the figure is gone. There are no broken branches, no disturbed leaves. On the morning of October 14th, the thermal hit finally came. The rescue team was dropped into the meadow. They found the Thornes bound together, but as they approached, the lead medic noted something that made him stop in his tracks. The ground around the couple was steaming, not from their body heat. The ground itself was 90 degrees Fahrenheit, while the surrounding snow remained frozen. The soil had been vitrified, turned into a glass-like substance in a perfect circle around them. Elias was conscious. When the medic cut the zip ties, Elias didn't ask for water. He didn't ask for his wife. He grabbed the medic's collar and whispered a string of numbers: 4, 12, 18, 4. The medic thought it was a code. It wasn't. Those were the ages of the 4 children who had gone missing in that same forest over the last 40 years. None of those names had been made public in a way Elias Thorne could have known. He had been missing for 3 days. How did he have a list of victims from 1982? The Hinsdale County Sheriff's Department took Elias and Sarah Thorne to a secure wing of the Gunnison Valley Hospital. But the investigation didn't follow them there. Instead of a forensic team, the couple was met by 3 men in charcoal suits who claimed to be from the National Park Service's Special Situations Division, an office that does not appear on any federal organizational chart. By 9 p.m. that night, the hospital's security footage from the West Wing was remotely erased. The official reason? A server-side magnetic interference. But here is what the night shift janitor saw before he was placed on administrative leave. He saw Elias Thorne being wheeled out of his room, not in a gurney, but in a pressurized containment chair. Elias wasn't screaming. He was humming a low, rhythmic frequency that the janitor claimed made the fluorescent lights above them vibrate until they shattered. When Marcus, the obsessed brother, forced his way into the room 2 hours later, he found it empty. The beds were made. The vitals monitors were unplugged. On the bedside table sat a single evidence bag containing the watch Elias had been wearing, the one set 3 hours into the future. Marcus took a photo of it before a deputy escorted him out. In the photo, the watch face isn't showing the time anymore. The liquid crystal display has bled into a single, solid black shape, the exact silhouette of the mountain peak where they were found. The police report filed on October 16th contains the first major contradiction. It states that the zip ties used to bind the couple were standard consumer hardware. But a leaked metallurgy report from the state lab tells a different story. The molecular structure of the plastic had been altered. The carbon chains were aligned in a way that occurs only under intense gravitational pressure, the kind of pressure you'd find at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, or the event horizon of a black hole. How do you find deep-sea physics in the middle of a Colorado forest? None of this explains what was found in Elias's pocket during the intake. It wasn't a wallet or a map. It was a handful of soil mixed with dried flower petals from a Silene acaulis, a moss campion. These flowers only bloom in the high alpine tundra during midsummer. In October, in the San Juans, they are dormant, buried under frost and dead brown husks. Yet these petals were fresh. They were damp with dew. According to the botanical analysis, they had been picked less than an hour before Elias was found. To find a blooming moss campion in October, you'd have to change the season, or you'd have to be somewhere else entirely. The system then moved to close the loop. At 4:47 p.m. on October 17th, the Hinsdale sheriff held a 4-minute press conference. He stated the Thornes had suffered a shared psychotic episode brought on by altitude-induced cerebral edema. He claimed they had bound themselves together in a state of delirium. He did not explain how Sarah Thorne, with her hands zip-tied behind her back, could have tightened the ties on her own wrists. He did not explain the vitrified ground. He simply walked away from the podium when a reporter asked about the man in the silver SUV. But Marcus had the dashcam footage from the Sprinter van. He spent 72 hours straight analyzing the reflections in the van's side mirrors. At 9:18 a.m. on the day they vanished, as Elias is checking the tires, a reflection appears in the chrome of the bumper. It's a man. He's standing 10 feet behind Elias, perfectly visible. But when you look at the primary angle of the camera, the view that should show the space behind Elias, there is no one there. The mirror sees him. The lens does not. Investigators call this a refractive shadow. It's a trick of light used in stealth technology to bend photons around an object. It means someone was standing right behind Elias Thorne. close enough to touch him, while remaining invisible to the naked eye. At the 8-minute mark of Marcus's personal investigation, he found the most damning piece of evidence the police refused to name. He returned to the trailhead and used a high-sensitivity microphone to record the ambient noise near Space 4C, where the SUV had been. When he slowed the recording down by 400%, he didn't hear wind or birds. He heard a voice. It was Sarah's voice. But it wasn't Sarah from the mountain. It was Sarah from the future. The recording, time-stamped October 18th, a day after the press conference, captured her saying, "Marcus, don't look at the watch. It's a countdown." By the time Marcus heard this, the watch was already in his pocket. He had stolen it from the hospital. He pulled it out, and for the first time, he noticed the black silhouette on the screen was moving. It wasn't a mountain. It was a map of his own pulse, and it was slowing down. At 11:12 p.m., the GPS on Marcus's phone pinged a tower 300 miles from the trailhead in a desert outside of Moab, Utah. Marcus's car, however, was still parked in his driveway in Lake City. Two places at once. This is the moment the theory no one wants to believe begins to take shape. The Thornes weren't kidnapped by a person. They were caught in a localized rupture, a thermal void, where the laws of linear time and physical matter become suggestions rather than rules. The search team leader, in a private interview years later, admitted that when they stood in that meadow, they didn't just find the couple. They found a third set of indentations in the snow. They were large, circular, and spaced 12 feet apart. They didn't lead to the meadow, and they didn't lead away. They were just there, like the footprints of a tripod that had been lowered from above and then retracted. "The ground wasn't just hot," the leader whispered. "It was humming. If you put your ear to the glass dirt, you could hear what sounded like 1,000 people screaming underwater. We were told to forget it. We were told the couple was crazy, but you don't get glass dirt from a crazy couple." The theory the government refuses to acknowledge involves a phenomenon known as nonlinear displacement. In 2021, a leaked memorandum from the Department of Energy's Advanced Research Projects Agency surfaced. It didn't mention hikers. It mentioned spatial thinning in high-altitude, high-mineral-density regions. The San Juan Mountains sit on one of the largest silver and tellurium deposits in the world. Tellurium is a semiconductor. When combined with specific solar flare activity, it creates what physicists call a transient pocket. This detail wasn't released until 2019. Ask yourself why. Inside the glove compartment of the Thornes' abandoned Sprinter van, investigators found a small, leather-bound notebook that hadn't been there during the initial sweep on October 12th. It appeared on October 15th, while the van was in a locked police impound lot. The handwriting inside is Sarah's, but the ink is a type of thermal reactive polymer not sold to the public. The first page contains a single date, October 14th, 2029. 5 years in the future. The notebook describes a gray room with no corners. It describes a man who speaks in frequencies rather than words. Sarah writes, "He doesn't have a face because he hasn't decided on one yet. He's wearing Elias's skin, but it fits him like an oversized suit." This wasn't the rambling of a dehydrated hiker. This was a clinical, cold observation. The most disturbing entry, however, was a list of names. It wasn't the missing children Elias had mentioned. It was a list of the search and rescue team members who had found them. Next to each name was a timestamp and a cause of death. The lead medic, October 30th, 2024, cardiac arrest. The sheriff, November 12th, 2024, single car accident. The drone operator, December 1st, 2024, disappearance. The evidence that changes everything arrived 6 weeks later. A second Garmin watch, identical to Elias's, was found by a hunter in a completely different part of the forest, 20 miles from the meadow. This watch wasn't crushed. It was pristine. When technicians extracted the data, they found a video file. Garmin watches don't record video. They don't have cameras. Yet there it was, 14 seconds of footage. It shows Elias and Sarah standing in a forest that looks like the San Juan's, but the sky is a bruised, pulsing purple. The trees are bone white. Sarah is looking directly at the camera. She isn't crying. She looks bored. She says, "It's the third time we've been found. Tell Marcus to stop coming. He's making the loop tighter." Behind her, the silver SUV from the parking lot is hovering 3 feet off the ground, its doors opening like wings. This is where the obsessed civilian narrative takes a dark turn. Marcus didn't stop. He tracked down the salvage yard in Ohio where the SUV had supposedly been crushed. He found the yard owner, a man who had worked there for 40 years. When Marcus showed him the photo of the faceless man, the owner didn't look surprised. He looked terrified. "That's not a man," the owner whispered. "That's a collector. They buy the cars that were involved in clean vanishings. We don't crush them. We wait for them to be picked up." "Picked up by who?" Marcus asked. "By the people who own the mountains." The system is not just the police. It's a network of silent agreements between land management and something that has been here longer than the trails. In 2025, a Freedom of Information Act request revealed that the Hinsdale County Sheriff's Office receives an annual grant from a private aerospace firm that exceeds their entire operating budget. The firm's specialty? Atmospheric folding. But Elias and Sarah Thorne are still alive. They were released from the hospital on October 18th and disappeared into a witness protection program that the Department of Justice claims doesn't exist. Their home in Denver was sold. Their bank accounts were drained. But every year on October 14th, a signal pings from the North Vista trailhead. It's a high-frequency burst, lasting only 3 seconds. The theory no one wants to believe is that the couple we found in the meadow wasn't the couple that went into the woods. They were refractions, biological copies left behind to satisfy the search teams while the originals were kept for measurement. If you look at the photos of Elias from before the hike and the photos taken during his recovery, there is one small physical difference. Elias Thorne was born with a distinct mole on his left cheek. The man who was rescued, the man who whispered the names of dead children, had a mole on his right. A mirror image, a perfect, inverted copy. The implications of the Thorne case reach far beyond the borders of a single Colorado forest. If the man rescued was a mirror of Elias, then we have to ask, where is the original? And more importantly, how many of the people you interact with every day are the originals? The mirror Elias died on October 30th, 2024, exactly as the notebook predicted. The cause was listed as cardiac arrest, but the attending physician, speaking under the condition of anonymity, noted that Elias's internal organs were transposed. His heart was on the right side of his chest. His appendix was on the left. It's a condition known as situs inversus, but it's something you're born with. You don't develop it during a 3-day hike in the San Juan's. The investigation into the silver SUV led Marcus to a final, chilling discovery. He tracked the collector to a decommissioned Cold War bunker in the Nevada desert. He didn't find a fleet of cars. He found a graveyard of impossible objects. Among them was a 2022 Mercedes Sprinter van identical to his brother's, but covered in a layer of dust that was carbon dated to be over 200 years old. Inside the van, the GPS was still active. It showed a route that didn't follow any known roads. It traced the tectonic fault lines of North America. The system works because it counts on your skepticism. It counts on you believing that people simply get lost, that they succumb to the elements, or that they have psychotic breaks. But altitude doesn't vitrify soil. Delirium doesn't allow you to predict the exact death dates of your rescuers. This isn't just about Elias and Sarah. It's about the spatial thinning that the Department of Energy is monitoring. These pockets are expanding. Since 2024, the number of clean vanishings in national parks has increased by 40%. The pattern is always the same: a high-tech vehicle, a competent victim, a refractive shadow in the footage, and a recovery that leaves more questions than answers. You've probably driven past a place like this, a stretch of highway where the radio cuts out for no reason, a trailhead that feels heavy, a parking garage level where you always feel like you're being watched, even when the cameras are down. Here is the warning. The mirrored Elias isn't the only one. When Sarah Thorne was last seen being moved into that pressurized chair, she looked at the janitor and whispered one final thing. It wasn't a plea for help. She said, "The countdown isn't for us, it's for the air." Forensic analysts have spent years debating what she meant. But if you look at the watch Marcus stole, the one showing a countdown, it isn't counting down to a time, it's counting down to a location. When the numbers hit 0, they resolve into a set of coordinates. Those coordinates aren't in the mountains. They aren't in the desert. They are the coordinates of your front door. No one has explained this. No one has tried. The Hinsdale County Sheriff's Office has been completely restructured. The Special Situations Division has moved its operations to a private facility in Northern Virginia. And Marcus? Marcus hasn't been seen since he entered that bunker in Nevada. His last outgoing call was to his own number. The voicemail he left for himself was 47 seconds of that same low, rhythmic frequency that shatters glass. The North Vista trailhead remains open. People still park in Space 4C. They lace up their boots, check their GPS, and walk into the trees. They feel safe because they are prepared. They feel safe because they believe the ground under their feet is solid. But remember, Elias and Sarah did everything right. They had the gear. They had the experience. They had the technology. None of it mattered. Because when you walk into a thermal void, you aren't a hiker anymore. You're a measurement. The garage still operates. The mountains still stand. But the next time you're out there and you see a silver SUV that doesn't belong, or a man standing just a little too still in the tree line, don't check your watch. Don't look at the sky. Just turn around. If you still can.